Okay. I know all of us have been rambling, me more than anyone else, but uh, we've managed to set at least some context, which is um, the laws either don't exist, or they are inadequate, or antiquated, right? And that um, so there is pretty much uh, not too much that is either guaranteeing or not guaranteeing what you can say online, right? In social media, for instance. Just like there are no curbs, there also doesn't seem to be an explicit um, guarantee that you have the right to say what you have to say online, right? Can I say that, Chinmay? Do you think that that's more or less what we said, or would you frame it differently?
I'd say in theory we have the right, but since we don't have it against the platforms, nothing stopping them from.
All right. Okay, which is inadequate, right? So now I want to understand how various people and various entities use this either to their advantage or to do what they want to do. And I'm going to ask Pankaj to come in here because in some ways his political party, I think, used it extremely well to. Sure, it was an on-ground movement, but it was also in some ways an online movement that helped your party. So can you just tell us how you sort of leveraged all this to your own benefit?
First of all, I would like to bring all this debate to some very basic things. Probably some experiences from grassroots day-to-day engagements, that whenever a new medium comes to us, means there is a context, there is a background. So, and so happens with social media platforms. So, whenever issues of individual rights comes, there is a context, there is a possibility that there is a huge proportion of society which may be brought into the entire debate in an entirely different perspective. So, as far as citizen-centric governance from below is concerned, some very basic issues comes. Things at stake is democracy at large, in which on from one vantage point means democracy requires participation without any reservation, without any precondition, and in growing complexity, in growing need for technocratic specificities, it requires a different kind of intervention. So it is probably much more than ever, there is a two different kind of needs of our time, that more and more mass participation is required. At the same time, more and more technocratic expert views, intervention from specifically chosen few are required. So this kind of a dilemma gives us entirely a different context. So I can see from the below that social media allows this to happen, and some of the very specific issues of individual freedom comes for me a bit later than to address some basic issues that there is a possibility of having information sharing, there is a possibility of sharing possibilities of engagements, interaction, which is technically available, technically possible through various mediums, through various platforms available. And at the same time, our regulations, our rules, our concerns are not matching with the issues at hand. So, agreeing the point that we are inheriting a state which does not really want to equate ourselves, diffuse ourselves, dissolve itself among people. It's a colonial legacy. The entire framework of our legal entity as a state does not allow at times to share all the necessary information with the people, which creates its legitimacy for itself. So here, for me, social media has to play a role, and is playing a role. But at the same time, we need to set our priorities, we need to set our preferences and agenda at the same time. So there can be entirely two different routes to address this wider issue, in which social media can play a role of entirely different kind, in which few who are not disconnected with the legacy of how democracy come into being in India or society like this, and at the same time they are capable of invoking all the possibilities hidden and explicit in the tools and techniques which are in our hand. So any sort of governance, any regime is bound to follow those brilliant minds who can harmonize these two tasks, these two challenges. As an elected representative, I feel this every day, that as a political party, as a political representative, you are forced to prioritize your personal interests. But as you see from the lens of technological possibilities, you see that you can behave differently. You can prioritize something which may not appear to be in your personal interest, but which can give you entirely a new opening. So this is something which concerned me a lot. Probably a new regime of regulation, a new perspective to look into individual liberty, probably follow a new understanding in which a new harmony can exist, a new harmony can be reached out. Probably this kind of an experience from below, I would like to bring in this debate, this panel discussion, and many more things will follow in our own interactive things.
Ruben wanted to make a point.
Yeah, maybe bringing in some views from an observer who recently moved to India. I found it very interesting that it was mentioned that in India you don't usually look at rules or at rights from an individual basis. This is something which is striking for a European who comes here to India. The whole debate, for example, about castes and reservations is for a European. You're just flabbergasted when you see it for the first time, because you simply cannot understand that here it is a thinking more in communities, more often in communities than in individual terms. And I think it is really important, especially when we're talking about the issue of individual rights in social media, that we come back to the point of view of an individual and how to empower an individual. It was you just said it, it's very challenging for a government or for the state to do what you're doing under these circumstances. But what I would also like to remind everybody of, that all around the world, not only in India, we see, especially among states and companies, a big and increasing hunger for data. Companies use it to sell it. Yeah, okay, I mean, they have to make some money, okay, this is their unique selling point. But states, they don't use it to sell it. They use it, there is increasing surveillance in the offline world and especially in the online world. And this is maybe a point where there are a lot of illusions and myths flying around. Always, when you go online, there's always a debate about privacy online, and always one point is national security. It always comes up, and the next point is always terrorism. It always comes up, especially since 9/11. It's always those same points. But I think it's an illusion, and then the next point is because of national security and because of terrorism threats, our security forces need more rights to, I don't know, to interception of data, to control data whatsoever. And then people completely forget that it's a complete illusion to think that security forces nowadays would have less access to data than, for example, 20 years ago. Just look at the amount of unencrypted smartphones they can analyze, about all the IP metadata they can analyze nowadays. And then it's just an illusion to keep telling that security forces need more access. And this is something where I think, coming back to the individual rights, this is, and then there's the empowerment aspect also. If you want to empower your citizens, if you want them to be sure that their personal data is safe, then there's all the time, then you come to the point when you talk about encryption. And what do you have the right to encryption? I mean, if you send a letter, just put an example from the offline world. If you send a letter from A to B, that there is a right that nobody can intercept it and open it and look at it. If you send an email from A to B, it's like a postcard. Yeah, I mean, it's easy. Yeah, if you know how to do it, it's so easy to read an email if it's not encrypted. And of course, then this is the point where the security forces in this discussion usually go ballistic. If you mention the point that you actually, if you want to empower your citizens, and if you want to save and to safeguard the personal data, because more and more personal data goes online nowadays, then there is one point when you have to talk about encryption. And this is the discussion I have, maybe I'm just too new in the whole context here, I have not yet seen in India, which I think is a very, very important, very interesting point, especially when we're talking about empowerment of citizens.
Okay, which is a good point. I think we'll throw it open, and both within the panel, I just want the panel to sort of react to a couple of things. I'm going to ask Aakar to start off. In some ways, I think all of us get a little fooled by the term social media. We believe that the fact that it offers you so much more avenue for communication, many of us rather naively equate that with very nuanced positions. But what it actually does is, there is no nuance in social media. There are only extreme positions in social media, right? It's almost as if, for want of a better word or a better analogy, I would say that we all approach social media in a very Coral Island sort of way. If all of you read that book, while it's actually more Lord of the Flies than Coral Island, right? I mean, we all get reduced very quickly and easily to our baser elements. Do you think that that's what we are seeing?
It depends on what medium we're talking about. If you're talking about Twitter, I would say yes, that it's more conversational, it's more casual, and you will find extreme views which ought not to, and I completely agree with you, be there. Or extreme views ought to be left to columnists. I don't think that people who use Twitter. If you were to isolate it and see it in that fashion, it would be fine. I think that to expect conversations to not have some element of extremism is unfair. I think that if you're limiting exchange to 140 characters, what you will find is a reduction. You will find an absence of words that bring in depth, and you will find an increase in the levels of emotion. And I think that is to be expected from the medium. I think it's one reason that Twitter is popular. I think, and it is popular with a certain sort of person who likes this sort of exchanges. And it's fine, I think most of us like. I think the important aspect to me is that, and I could be wrong here, is that it only, we talk about a democratization of the view, but it's limited in the main to anglicized middle class people. So that's 5% of India. 5% of India has passports. About 3.5% of India speaks in English as their first language. So I would say that it is a democratization of sorts, but it's a very narrow one. It doesn't really express a very general view. And depending on which part of social media you're in, whether Facebook or Twitter or there's something with photographs, I'm told, that's right. The level of intensity changes based on that.